Uh-oh. Okay, we'll start with this. Naoya Inoue's next fight is set against Ramon Cardenas March 4th in Vegas. Little is known about Ramon Cardenas as a fighter. He's just about as unheralded as the last guy that Inoue fought, but the opponent isn't what marks the occasion, it's the location. Undisputed super bantamweight champion and pound-for-pound star, Inoue, will face Ramon Cardenas on May 4th at the T-Mobile Arena in Vegas, promoter Top Rank announced. Anticipation had been building for the U.S. return of Japan's Inoue, 29-0 with 26 KOs, a 31-year-old four-division champion whose past 8 fights have been staged in his home country. Inoue has fought on 3 occasions in America, including twice in Vegas, but not since a 2021 knockout of Michael Dasmariñas. I am thankful to the fans in America who have followed my career, Inoue said. Fighting at the T-Mobile Arena in Vegas is another career highlight, and I look forward to putting on a great show for everyone in attendance. Cardenas is a tough opponent who I respect, accepting the fight without hesitation. Initially, it was supposed to be David Allen Picasso, but his team decided he wasn't ready for a fight like this, and they decided to go in another direction. Enter Ramon Cardenas. Top Rank's announcement confirmed previously reported by Boxing Scene, which was the first to tease of a loaded Cinco de Mayo weekend, now something of an annual holiday on the boxing calendar. That weekend, Ryan Garcia is going to be fighting Rolly Romero, Canelo's going to be shooting for Undisputed for the second time, and Inoue will make his long-awaited U.S. return. He thanked the fans here stateside, the ones who have been following his career, but this desire to see him return to U.S. soil isn't actually coming from them, it's coming from his would-be critics. The ones who think that unless a fight happens on U.S. soil, it doesn't count. That's where that sentiment actually comes from. So that weekend, kicking things off on Friday, May 2nd, will be a New York triple-header from Times Square: Ryan Garcia versus Rolly Romero, Devin Haney versus Jose Ramirez, and Teofimo Lopez versus Arnold Barboza. Then on Saturday, May 3rd, 3-belt unified super middleweight champion Canelo Alvarez will try to again become undisputed in the division when he faces fellow belt holder William Scull. Cinco de Mayo weekend has been a staple on the personal schedule of Mexico's Alvarez for years now. Meanwhile, Inoue gets his own date, Sunday, May 4th, and the proper Las Vegas treatment he was denied in his previous visits, which came at the height of the COVID pandemic. Inoue, who has stopped each of his last 10 opponents, including most recently Yi Jun Kim in January at the Ariake Arena in Kotokoku, Japan, appears to still be at the height of his boxer-puncher power. So there'll be a crowd there next time when Inoue fights, because the last 2 times he fought in the bubble.
Naoya Inoue is among the most powerful and well-rounded fighters I've had the privilege of promoting. A singular boxing talent. After many years selling out arenas and stadiums in his native Japan, the monster is ready to take over Las Vegas on Cinco de Mayo weekend. Ramon Cardenas is a worthy challenger who's earned this opportunity with several impressive victories.
Cardenas, 26-1 with 14 KOs, is a 29-year-old from San Antonio who most recently won a unanimous but tightly contested decision over Brian Acosta on February 8th in San Antonio. This means the world to me, Cardenas said. I've always aspired to fight for a world title, but to get a chance to fight for all the belts is a dream come true. I always knew our paths would cross. I never had any doubts. When the fight was offered, I instantly accepted. I wouldn't say it's a lottery ticket, but you can't turn it down. If you get a chance at the undisputed crown, this is the opportunity of a lifetime.
I want to say the last 2 years or so, whenever somebody said that he knew he needs to fight in America, that he needs to fight here, I think they had more game quarry in mind, but therein lies a dilemma.
The lower weights, in a very general sense, are not teaming with American fighters, and nobody there, nobody I see, is worthy of drawing Inoue away from his adoring public in Japan. If you ask me, this is a pointless endeavor, but
As a packaged deal, as part of a huge weekend of boxing, I'll take it.
by itself, it doesn't seem like much. Bringing Inoue all the way to America for a guy that most American boxing fans aren't familiar with anyway, but as part of a huge weekend in the sport, I guess it's alright. Same weekend Ryan is fighting Rolly and Canelo is fighting William. It's alright.
Not as interesting as some of the other fighters. People want to see Inoue fight. Fighters like Junto Nakatani.
MJ Akhmadaliev, Nick Ball.
Talked about that fight in my last video.
But I suppose that for anyone who wants to be there, wants to see it with their own two eyes and be in attendance for an Inoue fight, this is that opportunity. Let's see how many people take it.
Now as it pertains to Nick Ball.
Reacting to Nick Ball's win over TJ Doheny this past weekend, unbeaten up-and-comer Bruce Carrington reacted by saying, I would love to fight Nick Ball. Sometime this year, I just want my shot. How soon can we expect Bruce to get it?
Not just a shot at Nick Ball, but a shot at any alphabet title. I will say that he's a ways out from fighting Nick Ball because there's already a mandatory installed for Nick in Mirko Cuello, who's currently ranked at number 1 via the WBA's ranked standings.
Mirko Cuello is ranked at number 1, and Bruce Carrington is ranked at number 2 via the WBA. And short of a mandate, I don't even think that Bruce is on Nick's radar. Nick is thinking about fights with guys like Inoue and fellow champions like Stephen Fulton that I don't think he would just willingly give Bruce Carrington a shot. I don't think so.
Bruce is barking up the wrong tree.
Ranked at number 2 via the WBA, ranked at number 4 via the IBF. He's a ways out from securing a mandatory slot via the IBF. Their highest ranked contender is Tomoki Kamita.
That's the mandatory that's installed, and Tomoki Kamita's shot at Angelo Leo's red belt was officially announced earlier today.
So Bruce won't be getting the opportunity that he's looking for via the WBA or the IBF. Not through them, but perhaps via the WBO.
He's ranked number 1 with the WBO, and Rafael Espinoza still is WBO champion. My question is, if Bruce has to go through him to get the brown belt, will he do it?
He's ranked number 1 with the WBO, but he's also ranked at number 1 via the WBC. Stephen Fulton is the current reigning WBC champion in the featherweight division due to his second victory over Brandon Figueroa.
Ray Vargas is registered as a champion in recess. No idea when that guy means to come back. And Bruce Carrington just so happens to hold a secondary version of a WBC title. He's got a WBC silver.
There does not appear to be an interim champion installed via the WBC at this time, but it's conceivable that Bruce may be elevated to the position of mandatory challenger because he's already got a silver title and he's ranked at number 1. I feel like he'd sooner get a shot at Stephen Fulton's green belt than Nick Ball's black and gold.
Like I said, I don't think he's on Nick Ball's radar.
Though I don't mind the idea of a Bruce Carrington versus Rafael Espinoza fight or a Bruce Carrington versus Stephen Fulton fight. I could go for either of those fights if he can't get Nick Ball.
And I don't think he can.
Now, the more winnable fight of the two, between a Stephen Fulton fight and a Rafael Espinoza fight, I'd say, is the Stephen Fulton fight. I understand that Stephen Fulton became a two-weight champion in his last fight, but he only did so by beating a guy he already beat before, Brandon Figueroa, who really isn't very good. The fight before that, Stephen Fulton didn't look too hot. And against Bruce Carrington, it could be more of the same. I mean, remember, Brandon is a super bantamweight who moved up in weight just like Stephen, whereas Bruce is a career featherweight. He has been so far. What makes Stephen more beatable than Rafael? I would say that Rafael Espinosa's statuesque frame and firepower makes him the most dangerous champion of the 4 champions at this weight. I feel that's a much riskier fight than a Stephen Fulton fight would be. Stephen is more tactical and technical, whereas Rafael Espinosa is an artillery fighter, a dangerous one, a physically imposing one. And I don't get the sense that Bruce Carrington is chomping at the bit to get Rafael in the ring. I think that if he has to choose, he would choose Stephen Fulton, and that's a more winnable fight. So maybe that's how he'll get his crack at the big time, his world title opportunity. Maybe it will be for the green and gold. We'll have to wait and see. And finally, we now have the undercard information for the upcoming Canelo vs. Scull undisputed super middleweight title fight. And I have to say that on a scale of 1 to 10, I would grade this undercard a 7.5 with a potentiality of it being an 8.
You don't think that's a little bit high?
I guess you guys have become spoiled over time and have forgotten that your average undercard for a pay-per-view in America is really just a lot of forgettable matchups, forgettable fights, and the main event. So on this undercard, you're going to get the chance to see standout amateur from Mexico, Marco Verde, do his thing. In the paid ranks, there's that to consider. But you also have Martin Bakoli's ring return opposite the ring, F.A. Ajagba, as promised, for standing in on short notice and saving the Joseph Parker fight, being able to save the date. He's being rewarded. As promised. Turkey said that he would bring him back for another big fight, and so he has. It's not an IBF eliminator like it was supposed to be initially, but that's alright. The money's just as green.
That's fine.
An intriguing matchup because now Martin Bakoli is coming off a loss, and we have to see, can he go back to being who he was before Joseph Parker got his hands on him, or was he irreparably damaged by that second round knockout loss? He's had a full camp for this one, or he will have. I already thought it was an intriguing fight because I felt like too many people would jump into too many conclusions about Martin Bakoli. As a result of him beating Jared Anderson, I saw a lot of guys jumping off a cliff the way they usually do. He beat Tony Yoka, who's got a glass jaw, and he beat Jared Anderson, who was tantamount to a prospect that already wasn't looking good. I understand that those are respectable scalps on Martin Bakoli's resume, but don't forget, this is the same guy who already got beat by Michael Hunter. So ahead of the Joseph Parker fight, on that kind of notice, I actually went with Joseph to win. I picked Joseph to win a decision. He went a step further and knocked Martin out in just 2 rounds. So off of that, can F.A. Ajagba capitalize on these circumstances? I still think Martin Bakoli has a lot to prove, and that's what makes that fight intriguing for me. The Badu Jack versus Ryan Rositsky fight. I've talked about this fight, the potentiality of it, quite a bit the last few weeks and months, perhaps more so than any other YouTube channel. Ryan Rositsky is a very exciting fighter, albeit a limited fighter, whereas Badu Jack is comparatively a lot more seasoned, a lot more experienced, though perhaps too much. A 3-weight champion in his early 40s who hasn't fought in roughly 2 years. Perhaps if Badu Jack would have been fighting the last 2 years and not on his shelf, you could give him better odds. But this is a bona fide 50-50 fight, it is, because Badu Jack is a lot more experienced than Ryan Rositsky, but he's also in his early 40s, and he hasn't fought in 2 years. For all of Ryan Rositsky's limitations, he's a big, strong kid, he's got a chin, and he goes for the knockout. Not the most versatile, not the most graceful, but does he need to be for today's Badu Jack? I'll say this about Ryan. If you can't get it done with Badu Jack, then you just can't get it done. If you don't beat this guy, you don't stand no chance of beating any of the other belt holders at this weight. Not Jayo Pataya, not Zerto Ramirez. If you can't make it past Jack, you might as well pack it up. I could see this fight ending in a knockout. Either way, it's either Ryan Rositsky proves to be too young, too fresh and too strong for Jack, and he steamrolls him, or Jack uses his veteran tactics to set up Ryan Rosicki and walk him into something hard.
Ryan has never been knocked out, but then again, Ryan never fought anybody as experienced as Badu Jack. Anybody as good.
Of course, there is the rematch between Jaime Munguia and Bruno Surace. I don't have a lot of thoughts on this fight. I expect Jaime to not only avenge the loss to Bruno, but I expect Jaime to stop him. I expect Jaime to knock him out. Frankly, I think he looked past him the first time. He got reckless out there, and he paid for it. But the next time, he'll clean it up. What makes this entire card a 7.5 for me is not so much the names, but the matchmaking, that all three of those aforementioned fights have a high probability of ending in a knockout. Whether it's Bakoli versus Ajagba, Munguia versus Surace, or Jack versus Rosicki, there's a high probability.
It's gonna be a lot of knockouts.
We might breeze through this one, because I don't think a lot of these fights are going to go the distance. Over to the main event, Canelo versus Scull. Canelo Alvarez's second bid to become an undisputed champion in the super middleweight division. He was the first to do it in the four-belt era, and he was the first fighter of Mexican descent to do it in the four-belt era. So he's made history on more than one front, and now he means to do it again. I think he can. I think he's seen enough pure boxers over the years that he doesn't struggle with that style like he used to back when he fought Erislandy Lara. All of that movement.
Yeah, it used to bother him, but not anymore. He's taken on quite a few pure boxers since then. Caleb Plant, Billy Joe Saunders. Even though Jermel Charlo's not an according to Hoyle pure boxer, he fought like one. He spent the whole night running. Edgar Berlanga did too. These are all fights where Canelo won emphatically.
By coming forward, catching and shooting, applying pressure, and keeping the other guy on the move, keeping the other guy's guns holstered for fear of what was going to come back at them. And I don't expect it to be any different with William Scull.
But of course, what's a Canelo Alvarez fight announcement without a couple of boo birds? I see the Fire Stick Boys are back outside.
The usual suspects that for whatever reason take pride in stealing pay-per-views, stealing fights.
They were critical of the undercard. They don't like it. But do they ever like anything enough to pay for it?
Doesn't look like it, but Canelo has never relied on these guys to make a buck. I mean, they were just as critical of the Canelo versus Berlanga fight, and in spite of what they thought,
Thick criticism.
still sold 650,000 pay-per-view buys. 650,000!
You don't like Canelo versus Scull, you don't like the undercard, who gives a shit? You ain't got no buying power. So what you think doesn't matter.
Roll that up in a joint and smoke it. I think this card is about a 7.5 on paper with the potentiality of playing out like an 8.
8 out of 10, because I reiterate, a good number of these fights stand a high probability of ending in a violent knockout. We all know how much casuals love knockouts.
We don't yet know what the price point of this fight is going to be. Is it going to be competitively priced like all of Turkey's other shows, or will it be the customary $80?
Because if you're a Canelo Alvarez fan and you normally buy his fights, that's what you normally have to pay.
Bottom line, I like the show. I'm gonna buy it. No complaints from me.